8 years ago, Adrian Cole walked out on his pregnant wife with nothing but a signed divorce paper and a warning never to contact him again. He said 4 Barbies would ruin his future. He chose ambition, status, and the promise of becoming a CEO over the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. What Adrian never knew was that Elena did not break. She gave birth to quadruplets alone, studied at night while caring for 4 newborns, and fought her way through law school with a determination sharpened by betrayal. Years later, she was no longer the frightened woman he had abandoned. She had become one of the most feared corporate lawyers in the country, calm, brilliant, and impossible to intimidate. Then fate brought her back to the city. Adrian, now the CEO of a company, was preparing for the biggest deal of his career when rumors began spreading about a mysterious new owner taking control of the business. He expected an agging investor, a foreign billionaire, or some ruthless executive. He never expected Elena. She entered the boardroom in a flawless black suit, 4 children waiting outside, and a legal team following behind her. Adrian went pale the moment their eyes met. But the truth was even worse. Elena had inherited controlling shares in the company months earlier, yet she had no idea Adrian worked there, until she opened the CEO file and saw his name. The room fell silent as she took the head seat. Adrian's hands began to shake. He thought she had returned for revenge. Instead, Elena placed 1 folder in front of him and calmly announced a decision so shocking that every executive in the room froze. What she did next left the man who once abandoned her trembling and changed all 6 of their lives forever. Before we continue, kindly subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story of courage, justice, and unexpected consequences. If you believe a woman abandoned in her darkest hour deserves the chance to rise, protect her children, and reclaim the future others tried to steal from her, show your support by joining this community. Your subscription helps more stories like Elena's reach people who may need the reminder that betrayal is not the end of their journey. Sometimes, the person left with nothing becomes the one holding every card. Subscribe now, stay with us until the end, and tell us in the comments whether you think forgiveness should ever come before accountability. "I am not terminating Mr. Cole," Elena said. The statement landed harder than a dismissal. Around the polished walnut table, 12 executives shifted in their leather chairs. A few looked relieved, others looked confused. Adrian stared at Elena as though he had misheard her. She opened the folder. Effective immediately, the proposed Northbridge merger is suspended. Every account, contract, pension transfer, executive bonus, and offshore payment approved during the last 5 years will undergo an independent forensic audit. The color drained from 2 executives' faces. Elena continued. "Mr. Cole will remain CEO for 90 days. However, his authority to approve transactions, remove employees, access restricted financial systems, or contact outside investors without supervision is revoked." Adrian's lips parted but no words came. "He will answer every question," Elena said. "He will explain every signature. He will sit in this building and watch the truth come into the light. There will be no resignation followed by a golden parachute. There will be no quiet departure disguised as retirement. If he is innocent, the audit will clear him. If he is negligent, the company will know. If he is involved, the authorities will know." At the far end of the table, Chief Financial Officer Blake Mercer lowered his eyes. Elena noticed. She noticed everything. Adrian finally found his voice. "Why?" It was the same question he had asked her 8 years earlier when she had begged him not to leave. "Why are you making this difficult? Why can't you accept that my life is going somewhere? Why did there have to be 4? Back then, Elena had stood barefoot in the narrow kitchen of their rented apartment, one hand supporting the weight of her stomach and the other clutching the edge of the counter. Rain had struck the windows in silver lines. Adrian's suitcase had waited beside the door. Now she sat at the head of a boardroom beneath a ceiling of glass, controlling 58% of the company he had sacrificed her to lead. "Because revenge is quick," she answered. "Accountability takes longer." A faint sound came from the hallway. One of the children laughed. Adrian turned toward the closed boardroom doors so suddenly that his chair moved against the floor. Elena's expression did not change, but something tightened behind her eyes. The quadruplets had been told to remain in the executive lounge with Elena's assistant, Ruth Bennett. They were 8 years old now, old enough to understand that their mother had important work, and young enough to turn any unfamiliar room into a place of whispered games and dangerous curiosity. Noah was probably trying to discover which cabinet contained snacks. Maya would be reading the plaques on the wall. Elias would be asking Ruth 100 questions. Leela would be standing near the door, listening to everything. Leela always listened. She had inherited that from Elena. Adrian looked back at her. Are they? This meeting is not about my children. The word "my" struck him like a verdict. Elena closed the folder. The audit begins today. My legal team has already secured the relevant records. No one in this room is permitted to destroy, modify, conceal, or remove company information. Anyone attempting to do so will be reported immediately. Blake gave a strained laugh. Surely we don't need to treat senior leadership like criminals. Elena turned her gaze toward him. In my experience, Mr. Mercer, innocent people are usually less frightened by preserved evidence. The laugh died in his throat. Adrian watched her with an expression she could not identify. Fear was there, shame perhaps, but beneath both was something more unsettling. Recognition. He was beginning to understand that the frightened woman he remembered had vanished long before she entered that room. Elena rose. The executive stood with her, some out of respect and others because uncertainty made obedience easier. Mr. Cole, she said, remain here. Everyone else filed out. Blake paused near Adrian, his hand touching the back of the CEO's chair. We should speak privately, he murmured. You should speak to your attorney, Elena replied. Blake left without looking at her again. When the doors closed, Adrian and Elena were alone for the first time in 8 years. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The city stretched beyond the windows behind Elena, all steel towers and distant traffic. When they had been married, Adrian used to bring her to the roof of their apartment building. He would point toward the downtown skyline and name the buildings he intended to enter one day. That one, he had said on their 2nd anniversary, pointing at the tallest tower, one day I'm going to work up there. Elena had leaned against him, smiling. And what will I be doing? You'll be beside me. It had sounded like a promise. She had not understood that he meant she could stand beside him only if she never became heavy enough to slow his climb. Adrian stepped away from the table. Elena. She hated the way he said her name. Not because it sounded cruel, but because it sounded familiar. Her name had once been safe in his mouth. Ms. Vale will be appropriate during company matters, she said. His forehead creased. Vale. My professional name. It had belonged to Miriam Vale, the woman who had changed Elena's life. Elena had taken it 2 years earlier, not as an attempt to erase the past, but as a tribute to the person who had taught her that survival and identity were not the same thing. Adrian stared at her. You changed your name. You changed your entire life. His eyes dropped. Elena moved toward the window, placing distance between them. I didn't know you were the CEO when I inherited the shares, she said. Miriam kept her investment structure private. The company was managed through trusts, holding firms and voting representatives. I began reviewing the organization only after probate was completed. And then you saw my name. 3 days ago. What did you feel? She turned slowly. That question assumes you still have the right to know. He flinched. Outside the boardroom, a child's voice rose in protest. Noah, give it back. Adrian's face changed. It was not dramatic. There were no tears or grand gestures. His expression simply collapsed in the quiet way of a structure, finally recognizing the crack running through it. 4 children. He whispered. Elena said nothing. He looked toward the door again. 2 boys and 2 girls. That information is not relevant to the audit. Please. The word came so softly that Elena almost missed it. 8 years earlier, she had used that same word until it lost meaning. Please sit down. Please listen. Please come to the appointment. Please don't make a decision tonight. Please don't leave me alone. Adrian had fastened his suitcase and replied that begging would not change reality. Now Elena watched him discover what begging felt like when the person holding the answer had learned to live without giving it. They are healthy, she said at last. They are intelligent, they are loved, they have never lacked a family. The relief on his face was immediately followed by pain. Do they know about me? They know that their biological father left before they were born. He closed his eyes. Elena heard another echo from the past. The doctor's office had smelled of disinfectant and coffee. The ultrasound screen glowed in the dim room while the technician moved the instrument across Elena's stomach. One heartbeat had appeared. Then another. Then a third. The technician had gone quiet before calling in the physician. Adrian had gripped Elena's hand as 4 small forms became visible. For one bright, terrifying moment, he had laughed. Elena remembered it because she had held on to that sound for months afterward, trying to convince herself that it proved he had loved them. 4, he had said, "Are you serious?" The doctor smiled, very serious. Adrian had kissed Elena's forehead. That evening, however, his father called. Richard Cole had never approved of Elena. She had grown up with little money, no influential family, and no connections that could help his son. Richard viewed every relationship as a transaction, and Elena's value had always seemed insufficient. By the following week, Adrian had stopped touching her stomach. A month later, he began sleeping in the spare room. Then came the offer. Richard had arranged a senior position for Adrian at Vale Global Industries, the company he described as the gateway to power, but the role required total commitment, no interruptions, no domestic catastrophe, as Richard called the pregnancy. Adrian had told himself he was choosing a future that would someday benefit everyone. The night he left, he could not look directly at Elena. "I will send money when I'm established," he said. "I don't want your money, I want my husband. I can't be both. A husband and an executive. A father to 4 newborns, and the man I'm meant to become." Elena had stared at him in disbelief. "Then the man you're meant to become is a coward." His face hardened. Perhaps that sentence followed him through every promotion. Perhaps it waited inside every expensive office, beneath every congratulatory handshake and magazine profile. Elena had no interest in finding out. A knock sounded at the boardroom door. Ruth entered, looking apologetic. She was in her late 50s now, with silver beginning to thread through her dark hair. 8 years earlier, she had been the night shift nurse who held Elena's hand during the most frightening hours of labor. She was also the woman who had later offered Elena and 4 infants the spare rooms in her small house. "Elena," Ruth said, "we have a minor situation." Behind her stood the children. Noah clutched a gold executive pen. Elias held a plate containing 3 cookies. Maya carried a company history book almost as large as her torso. Leela stood empty-handed. She was staring directly at Adrian. The resemblance was undeniable. Noah had Adrian's dark hair. Maya had the same thoughtful crease between her eyebrows. Elias had his deep brown eyes. Leela had his chin and Elena's unyielding stare. Adrian gripped the back of a chair. Noah looked from him to Elena. "Is this the CEO who's in trouble?" Ruth covered a cough. Elena gave her son a measured look. "We do not know whether he is in trouble. That is why we investigate facts before forming conclusions." "But you took away his powers," Maya said. "Some of them. So he's a little in trouble," Elias concluded. Adrian's mouth trembled. Leela did not smile. She looked at the nameplate in front of him. Adrian Coles, Chief Executive Officer. Then she looked at her mother. "That's him, isn't it?" The room went still. Elena had known this moment might come. She had planned to speak to the children privately that evening, somewhere quiet and familiar. She had imagined a careful conversation around the dining table. Ruth would be nearby. Elena would answer each question honestly without giving the children the burden of adult anger. She had not imagined bright boardroom lights and Adrian standing only a few feet away. Noah's playful expression faded. Maya lowered the book. Elias slowly placed his plate on the table. Adrian looked at Elena, silently asking permission to speak. She did not grant it. "Yes," Elena said, "Adrian Cole is your biological father." Elias' eyes widened. Noah stared at the floor. Maya studied Adrian as though he were a difficult paragraph. Leela folded her arms. "You said he left because he wanted a different life," she said. "He did." Adrian's shoulders dropped. Leela's eyes filled, but her voice remained steady. "Did the different life make you happy?" Adrian looked as if he had been struck. "No," he said. Elena's pulse quickened. She had not given him permission, but she did not interrupt. Leela took one step forward. "Then you left us for nothing." Adrian lowered his head. "Yes." The honesty surprised Elena more than any excuse would have. Ruth gently placed her hand on Leela's shoulder. "We should go," she said. Noah returned the gold pen to the table. Maya set down the history book. Elias left the cookies untouched. As they turned away, Adrian spoke again. "I'm sorry." Leela stopped, but she did not look back. "You're sorry because you can see us now," she said. "You should have been sorry when we were too small to ask where you were." Then she walked out. The doors closed. Adrian sank into a chair. Elena remained standing. She had imagined this meeting in 100 different ways during the loneliest years of her life. In some versions she screamed, in others she told him exactly what she had survived. She would describe the winter when the heating failed, and she slept beside 4 cribs to keep the Barbies warm. She would tell him about studying contract law while warming bottles at 2 in the morning. She would make him understand the fear she felt when Noah developed a fever before an important exam, or when she had only enough money for medicine or the bus ride to class. She would tell him that Ruth worked extra shifts so Elena could attend lectures. She would describe the scholarship committee that nearly rejected her because they did not believe a mother of 4 could complete law school. She would tell him how she sat before that committee in a borrowed suit and said, "You are not deciding whether I am capable. You are deciding whether your institution is brave enough to admit that capability can come from an exhausted woman carrying 4 diaper bags." She received the scholarship. She graduated first in her class. Adrian had missed all of it. Yet looking at him now, Elena felt no urge to list the years like charges in an indictment. His children had already delivered the only testimony that mattered. "You will have no contact with them unless they request it," she said. He looked up. "I understand. You will not send gifts to earn affection." "I understand. You will not use the company, the media, or anyone connected to me to obtain information about them." "I won't. And you will not mistake my decision to investigate before removing you as mercy." Adrian nodded. "It isn't mercy," she said. "It is procedure." He looked at the folder in front of him. "What do you think you're going to find?" Elena watched his face carefully. "I was about to ask you the same question." For the first time, fear in his expression shifted away from her and toward something else. That was when Elena knew the audit would uncover more than poor judgment. Adrian had not spent 8 years merely climbing. He had spent 8 years trying not to look down. The first warning appeared before sunset. Elena's forensic team discovered a series of payments labeled as consulting fees. The money moved through 3 subsidiaries before reaching an account in the Cayman Islands. The payment authorizations carried Blake Mercer's approval. The final release carried Adrian's electronic signature. The second warning was worse. Employee pension funds had been used as temporary collateral for high-risk expansion loans. The transfers were technically reversible, but only if the Northbridge merger succeeded. If the merger failed after closing, thousands of workers could lose part of their retirement savings. Adrian entered Elena's temporary office at 7 that evening. She sat behind a desk covered with reports. Ruth had taken the children home. The The building had grown quiet, though the investigation teams continued working on 3 floors. "You knew," Elena said without looking up. "I knew the company was using internal reserves to support the acquisition. Pension funds are not internal reserves. I was told the transfers were protected by Blake." "Yes, and you accepted that." "He showed me legal opinions, prepared by a firm his brother owns." Adrian stared at her. Elena slid a document across the desk. He read the first page and swore under his breath. "You signed the approval," she said. "I sign hundreds of documents. That explanation might impress a careless board. It will not impress a judge." He ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't know his brother owned the firm." "You didn't ask." "No." The single word carried more weight than denial. Elena leaned back. "Why were you rushing the merger?" Adrian walked toward the window. "Northbridge owns a battery storage technology that could make this company the largest clean energy supplier in the region. That is the public reason." He remained silent. Elena waited. Silence had become one of her strongest courtroom tools. People feared empty space. They filled it with explanations, and explanations often opened doors evidence could not. Finally, Adrian spoke. "The company has been losing money for 18 months. The board reports show record growth. The reports are misleading. Fraudulent. I don't know. You are the CEO. I know what my title is. Apparently not what it means." He turned sharply. "You think I don't understand that? I think you became skilled at accepting information that protected your ambitions." His face tightened. The sentence was about the company. It was also about everything else. Adrian returned to the desk. 3 years ago, Miriam Vale began reducing her involvement, he said. Her voting trust allowed the board to operate independently. Richard became chairman. Blake controlled financial reporting. I focused on expansion. Your father placed Blake in the company. Yes. And you never questioned their relationship. I questioned it, but not loudly enough to risk your position. Adrian looked away. Again, the past stood between them. Elena studied the man he had become. His suit was expensive, but the cuffs were creased. His eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had not slept properly in years. There had been a time when she could read his moods from the way he closed a door. Now every detail felt both familiar and foreign. Where is Richard? She asked. Geneva. Why? He said he was meeting investors. My team found no scheduled investor meeting. Adrian went still. When did he leave? Elena asked. Yesterday morning. The ownership announcement was delivered to the board yesterday afternoon. Adrian understood immediately. He knew. Perhaps he. And he left. Perhaps he. Adrian laughed once without humor. My father has always had excellent timing. Elena gathered the documents. You will provide every private communication between you, Richard, Blake, and the board. Some of those communications are personal. Then you may choose whether privacy is worth being treated as a potential conspirator. His gaze met hers. You really would destroy me. No, Elena said. I will uncover what you built. If it collapses under the weight of the truth, blame the architect. That night, Adrian returned to the penthouse he had purchased 5 years earlier. The rooms were immaculate. The silence was unbearable. His housekeeper had left dinner in the refrigerator. He did not touch it. Instead, he opened a locked drawer in his study and removed an old photograph. Elena stood on a beach with wind pulling at her white dress. She was laughing because Adrian had stepped into the water wearing his shoes. The photograph had been taken during their honeymoon. He had told himself for years that keeping it was evidence of regret. Now he recognized it as another form of selfishness. Regret without action had cost him nothing. He carried the photograph to the fireplace, intending to burn it, but stopped when he noticed something written on the back. Wherever we go together. Elena's handwriting. Adrian sat on the floor. Memories came without permission. Elena placing a cup of coffee beside his textbooks when he studied for business school entrance examinations. Elena working double shifts at a neighborhood pharmacy to help pay his tuition. Elena repairing the same pair of shoes 3 times because they could not afford new ones. Elena sitting in the front row at graduation, cheering louder than anyone when his name was called. Richard had arrived late and left early. Yet when success finally appeared, Adrian had followed his father. He had spent 8 years believing his greatest failure was abandoning Elena. That evening, after seeing 4 children with his eyes and his questions in their faces, he understood that his failure had multiplied every day he stayed away. At 6 the next morning, he sent Elena access to his private communications. At 7, Blake attempted to erase files from an archived server. The forensic team detected the attempt immediately. By 8, company security escorted him from the building. Blake shouted that the audit was illegal, that Elena was abusing her ownership, and that Adrian had approved everything. His final words echoed across the lobby. "You think Cole is innocent? Ask him about Project Lighthouse." Elena heard the statement from the mezzanine. Adrian stood beside her. "What is Project Lighthouse?" she asked. His face revealed nothing. An abandoned development plan. Why would Blake mention it? To create suspicion. He succeeded. Adrian exhaled. Lighthouse was a research facility Miriam wanted to build 6 years ago. The project was cancelled. Why? Cost overruns. That is not the answer. His jaw tightened. The site was contaminated. With what? Industrial chemicals from a previous owner. Was the contamination disclosed? To the board, and to the surrounding community. Adrian did not answer. Elena felt cold. People live near that site. The contamination was underground. The environmental consultant said the risk was contained. Which consultants? He looked toward the lobby where Blake had disappeared. Another firm recommended by him. Elena closed her eyes briefly. Every investigation began with a thread. This one was becoming a rope around the company's throat. "Get in the car," she said. "Where are we going?" Lighthouse. The abandoned facility stood 40 miles outside the city, behind rusted gates and warning signs faded by rain. Elena arrived with Adrian, 2 environmental attorneys and an independent testing team. The air smelled of wet earth and metal. Beyond the fence, skeletal buildings rose against a grey sky. Across the road stood a neighborhood of small homes. Children's bicycles rested on lawns. A school bus stopped near the corner. Elena stared at Adrian. "You allowed this to remain undisclosed." "I relied on the environmental report." "You relied on a document created by a man now attempting to destroy evidence." "I know what it looks like." "No," she said. "You know what you hope it looks like. I am interested in what it is." An elderly woman approached from one of the houses. She wore gardening gloves and carried a folder protected by a plastic bag. "Are you from the company?" she asked. Elena introduced herself. The woman's name was Helen Ward. She had lived across from the facility for 23 years. For the past 4, she had written letters complaining about discolored water flowing through a drainage ditch after heavy rain. No one answered, Helen said. Adrian's face darkened. "Who did you send the letters to?" "The chairman's office, the chief executive, the city." She opened the folder. Copies of the letters were addressed to Richard Cole and Adrian Cole. Adrian took one. Elena watched his eyes move across the page. "I never received these." Helen gave him a tired look. That is what important men always say. Adrian had no response. The testing team entered the site. Elena remained with Helen while rain began to fall. Years earlier, on the night Adrian left, it had rained exactly like this. For a moment, Elena was back in the apartment, staring at the closed door after his footsteps vanished down the hallway. She remembered lowering herself into a chair because her knees would no longer hold her. She remembered placing both hands on her stomach. "I'm still here," she had whispered to the Barbies. "I don't know how, but I'm still here." Hours later, Ruth called to confirm Elena's next prenatal appointment. When Elena began crying, Ruth drove across the city and found her alone. "You don't have to solve the rest of your life tonight," Ruth had said. "You only have to survive tonight." That sentence became a bridge. Elena crossed it one night at a time. Standing near the abandoned facility, she realized the company's workers and neighbors were facing the same kind of uncertainty. They did not need elegant promises about future repairs. They needed someone to survive the present with them. "We will pay for independent water testing at every nearby home," Elena told Helen. "The results will go directly to residents and regulators, not through the company." Helen searched her face. "People have promised before. I won't ask you to trust a promise, judge the action." Adrian looked at Elena. It was the same principle she had applied to him. By evening, preliminary tests showed elevated chemical levels in soil near the facility's drainage system. The full results would take days, but the risk was real enough to require immediate action. Elena ordered temporary water deliveries, medical screenings, and relocation assistance for the closest families. The company's communications director warned that admitting concern before final results could damage the stock price. Elena replied, "Then the stock price will reflect the truth." Adrian supported the order. It was the first decision they made together. Richard called him that night. Adrian placed the call on speaker in Elena's office. His father's voice filled the room. "What have you done?" "We investigated Lighthouse," Adrian said. "You had no authority to reopen that issue." "I'm the CEO." "You are the CEO because I made you one." Elena watched Adrian's expression. There it was, the invisible chain that had controlled him for years. Richard continued. "The site was contained, every report confirmed it. The reports may have been manipulated." "By whom?" "Blake." Richard laughed. "Mercer has served this company faithfully for 15 years. He tried to delete records. He panicked because your former wife entered the building with a personal vendetta." Elena leaned toward the phone. "This is Elena Vale." A pause followed. When Richard spoke again, his tone changed. "Elena." Unlike Adrian, he did not sound shocked. "You knew I inherited Miriam's shares," she said. "I heard rumors. You left the country before the announcement. I had business abroad. You also received complaints regarding Lighthouse." "Baseless complaints." "Those complaints were addressed to Adrian but never reached him. Perhaps his office lost them." Elena glanced at Adrian. He looked ill. "You should return," she said. "I do not take instructions from you. As majority owner, I am formally requesting the board chairman's presence during a material investigation. I will return when my schedule permits. The regulators may be less flexible." Silence. Then Richard said, "You always were dramatic." Elena remembered him saying something similar at her wedding. She had worn a simple dress from a discount shop. Richard looked at the small reception and remarked that poor people often confused emotion with importance. Elena smiled faintly. "And you always mistook confidence for immunity." She ended the call. Adrian stood by the window. "He knew about the inheritance," he said. "Yes." "He didn't warn me." "No." "He left me here to take the blame." "Possibly." Adrian looked at her. "You enjoy saying that word. It prevents assumptions from becoming facts. My father has spent my entire life turning facts into whatever serves him. And you let him." The words were not cruel. That made them worse. Adrian nodded slowly. "Yes." The audit continued. Each day exposed another concealed decision. vendor contracts had been awarded to companies connected to board members. Bonuses were paid despite missed safety targets. Complaints from employees had been redirected to a compliance office controlled by Blake. Adrian's signatures appeared repeatedly. Sometimes he remembered approving the documents. Sometimes he did not. He began arriving before the investigators and leaving after midnight. He answered every question. When he could not remember, he said so. When he had ignored a warning, he admitted it. Elena watched without praise. Accountability was not heroism. It was the minimum payment on a long overdue debt. 3 days later, Ruth brought the children to Elena's office after school. Their babysitter had become ill, and Ruth needed to attend a medical appointment. Elena arranged for them to complete homework in a conference room, far from the executive floor. Adrian learned they were in the building when he saw 4 backpacks near the elevator. He did not ask to meet them. Instead, he left. An hour later, Elena found a stack of company cafeteria vouchers beside the backpacks. There was no note. She returned them to Adrian's desk. That evening, he came to her office. "I wasn't trying to buy them. They don't need vouchers. I thought they might get hungry. They brought food." He nodded, embarrassed. "Do you know what Noah likes to eat?" Elena asked. "Knows. Maya's favorite subject. Knows. What makes Elias afraid?" His eyes lowered. "No. What does Leela do when she cannot sleep?" "I don't know. That is why gifts are easy. They allow someone to perform affection without learning the person." Adrian took the vouchers. "You're right." Elena had expected him to argue. His agreement unsettled her. "You don't have to turn every conversation into punishment," he said quietly. "I'm not punishing you. It feels like punishment. That feeling is called consequence." He left without another word. Inside the conference room, Maya had been listening through the partially open door. Later, while Elena drove home, Maya asked, "Do people stay bad forever?" Elena looked at her daughter in the rearview mirror. "Knows. Can someone become good?" "Yes." "Then do we have to forgive them?" "Knows." Maya considered this. "Why not?" "Because becoming better is something a person should do because it is right. Forgiveness is not a prize other people are required to give them." Leela stared out the window. Noah twisted the strap of his backpack. Elias asked, "Can we forgive someone a little?" Elena smiled despite herself. "I suppose forgiveness can happen in pieces." That night, after the children were asleep, Ruth found Elena sitting at the kitchen table with unopened legal files. "You are angry that he is cooperating," Ruth said. Elena looked up. "Why would that make me angry?" "Because it would be easier if he were exactly the monster you prepared yourself to face." "He abandoned 4 children." "Yes." "He abandoned me while I was medically vulnerable." "Yes." "He signed documents that may have endangered workers." "Yes." Ruth sat across from her. "But..." Elena frowned. "There is no but. There is always a but when you have to say there is no but." Elena looked toward the hallway. Photographs of the children covered the wall. First birthdays, school concerts, missing teeth, muddy shoes, 4 lives built without Adrian. "I don't want them hurt," she said. "Then protect them." "What if curiosity hurts them?" "Protection is not the same as controlling every answer." Elena's voice tightened. "You didn't see his face when I told him there were 4. He looked at them like they were a disaster." "I saw your face after he left," Ruth replied. "I know what he did." "Then why are you defending him?" "I'm not. I'm defending your right to make decisions based on who he is now, not only who he was then." Elena closed the file. "And if who he is now is simply a more polished coward, then the truth will reveal that too." The next morning, an envelope arrived at Elena's office. Inside was a copy of her original divorce agreement. Attached to it was an amendment she had never seen. The document created a confidential financial trust for any children born from the marriage. It had been signed by Adrian 8 years earlier, but never activated. A note had been added in Richard Cole's handwriting. Hold until paternity is confirmed. Do not inform Elena. Release only with my authorization. Elena read the note 3 times. Then she summoned Adrian. He entered her office and saw the document. Shock crossed his face. Where did you get that? It was delivered anonymously. He picked up the trust amendment. I signed this. You said you would send money when you were established. I created the trust the week I left. It was never funded. I transferred $200,000. Elena's anger rose so quickly that she had to place both hands on the desk. There was no money. I gave it to my father's attorney. Then your father kept it. Adrian stared at the handwriting. I thought the account was active. For 8 years you never checked. His face crumpled. Elena wanted to throw the paper at him. You do not get credit for money you assumed was helping children you refused to see. I'm not asking for credit. You built an entire moral defense from assumptions. You assumed the Barbies were cared for. You assumed money arrived. You assumed the company's reports were accurate. You assumed your father knew best. Every time truth demanded courage, you hired an assumption to stand in your place. Adrian gripped the document. You're right. Stop saying that as though agreement repairs anything. What do you want me to say? The truth. He looked at her for a long moment. The truth is that I was afraid, he said. Not of the children, not really. I was afraid that I would become ordinary. Elena's anger went still. My father raised me to believe there were 2 kinds of people, those who controlled life and those life controlled. When the doctor said 4 Barbies, I saw bills, exhaustion, missed opportunities. I saw myself becoming the man my father despised. You saw your family as failure. Yes. The word barely left his mouth. Adrian's eyes shone, but he did not look away. I loved you, he said. That is another truth. I loved you and I still chose myself. Maybe that makes it worse. It does. I know. No, you are beginning to know. He nodded. Elena pointed toward the document. Find out where the money went. I will. And Adrian. He paused at the door. Do not turn your father's manipulation into an excuse. He may have stolen the money, but you gave him the opportunity by disappearing. I understand. This time Elena believed he did. The anonymous envelope had no fingerprints and no return address. Security footage showed it had been delivered by a courier using false identification. The next clue arrived through Maya. The children were again completing homework in the conference room when Maya opened the company history book she had taken from the boardroom. A folded page slipped from the back cover. It contained a handwritten list of dates, payment amounts and initials. At the bottom were the words, "Ask Miriam about the lighthouse before Richard buries it." Maya carried the paper to Elena. Was I supposed to find this? Elena studied the faded ink. I don't know. Then maybe someone hoped you would. The page appeared to have been hidden years earlier. Miriam Vale had known something. Elena remembered the last conversation she had with her mentor. Miriam lay in a private hospital room, weakened by illness but mentally sharp. She had dismissed the nurses and asked Elena to close the door. I am leaving you control of the company, she said. Elena thought the medication had confused her. I don't want your company. That is why you should have it. Miriam, you have relatives. I have people who share my blood. That does not make them guardians of my work. Why me? Miriam looked toward the window. Because you understand that power is not ownership. Power is responsibility. Elena had tried to refuse. Miriam insisted. There are things inside Vale Global that I was too slow to confront, she said. I trusted people because I wanted peace during the final years of my life. Peace purchased with silence becomes complicity. What things? When the time comes, begin with the place where light was promised. Elena had assumed Miriam meant the company's renewable energy mission. Now she understood. Lighthouse. Miriam had been warning her. The handwritten initials matched payments already discovered in the audit. RC appeared beside the largest amounts. BM appeared beside consulting transfers. AC appeared only twice. Elena examined the dates. Adrian's initials corresponded with 2 approvals he had already admitted signing. Richard and Blake appeared throughout the entire list. At the bottom, beside a payment of $5 million, were the initials DH. No current executive had those initials. Adrian recognized them. Daniel Harrow, he said. Miriam's nephew. Daniel had challenged Elena's inheritance in court and lost. He claimed Miriam lacked capacity when she changed her will. He had also disappeared from public view after the ruling. Elena's legal team found him in a private rehabilitation centre outside London. Before they could contact him, Richard returned from Geneva. He arrived at company headquarters, surrounded by attorneys, and walked into the boardroom as though he still owned the building. Elena waited at the head of the table. Adrian sat to her right. Richard looked at his son with open disgust. "You have embarrassed this family." Adrian's voice remained calm. "Which family?" Richard glanced toward Elena. "So she has already poisoned you against me." "No," Adrian said, "you did that yourself." Richard placed a leather folder on the table. "My attorneys have prepared an emergency petition challenging Elena's authority. Miriam's transfer was the product of manipulation by an employee in a position of trust." "I was her lawyer," Elena said. "The transfer was reviewed by independent counsel, 2 physicians and the probate court." "Courts make mistakes. Then appeal." "I intend to." Elena slid the handwritten page toward him. Richard's eyes flickered. "Do you recognize this?" "No." "Interesting, your initials appear 14 times. Initials prove nothing. Then you will have no objection to explaining the matching bank transfers." Richard looked at Adrian. "You gave her private records." "I gave the company records to the company's owner." "I made you." Adrian's expression changed. "No," he said, "Elena did." Richard frowned. "She worked while I studied. She believed in me when I had no title. She made sacrifices you never noticed because you never understood anything that could not be placed on a balance sheet." Elena stared at him. Adrian continued. "You gave me access. She gave me a reason to become worthy of it. I betrayed her and you rewarded me because betrayal made me easier to control." Richard's face hardened. "This performance will not save you." "I'm not trying to save myself." For the first time since returning, Richard seemed uncertain. Elena opened another file. "Did you intercept $200,000 intended for your grandchildren?" Richard glanced toward his attorneys. One of them whispered something. "I have no knowledge of such a transfer," Richard said. Adrian placed the trust amendment on the table. "That is your handwriting." "It appears to be." "Where is the money?" Richard leaned back. "You were 27 years old, frightened and irrational. I protected you from a woman who would have used those children to destroy your future." Adrian rose so quickly that the table shook. Elena's voice cut through the room. "Sit down." He looked at her. "Sit down, Mr. Cole." Slowly, Adrian returned to his chair. Elena turned to Richard. "Thank you." "For what?" "For admitting you knew about the children and controlled the trust." His attorney closed his eyes. Richard realized the mistake. "You twisted my words. The recording will allow a judge to decide." Richard stood. "This meeting is over." "No," Elena said, "your chairmanship is over." She placed a board resolution on the table. "As majority shareholder, I called an emergency vote before your arrival. 7 directors supported your suspension pending investigation, 3 opposed, 2 abstained. Richard stared at the other board members. They avoided his eyes. You cannot remove me from my own company. Miriam founded this company, Elena said. You were invited to help lead it. You confused proximity with possession. Richard pointed toward Adrian. And you think he will remain loyal to you? He abandoned you once. Elena's gaze did not waver. I do not require his loyalty. I require evidence. Richard left the boardroom with his attorneys. The moment the doors closed, Adrian released a breath. You knew he would admit knowledge of the trust. I suspected his pride would speak before his attorney could stop him. You used the children. No, I used his belief that the children were insignificant. Adrian looked at her. There was admiration in his expression. Elena did not welcome it. Do not romanticize what is happening, she said. You are not standing beside me, you are answering for your role in this. I know. You keep saying that. Because I spent 8 years not knowing anything that mattered. Later that afternoon, Daniel Harrow agreed to speak with investigators. He had once served as the company's director of land acquisitions. Richard and Blake had paid him to purchase the lighthouse property through a shell company, hiding the contamination report from Miriam and the board. When Miriam discovered irregularities, Daniel warned her that Richard planned to declare her mentally unfit and seize control. Daniel helped her preserve evidence, but fear and addiction made him vulnerable. Richard paid him to disappear and later used his history to discredit him. The handwritten page had belonged to Daniel. He hid it in the company history book shortly before leaving. The evidence transformed the investigation into a criminal matter. Regulators arrived. Search warrants were executed. Reporters gathered outside the headquarters. Vale Global stock dropped 30% in 2 days. Employees feared layoffs. Investors demanded Elena sell the company before it collapsed. She refused. At a meeting with department leaders, she stood before hundreds of anxious employees. I will not pretend the next months will be easy, she said. The company has lost money, trust and time, but it will not recover by sacrificing the people who built it. She announced that executive bonuses would be frozen, company aircraft would be sold, several luxury properties owned through corporate accounts would be liquidated. The proceeds would protect pension funds, finance the lighthouse cleanup, and maintain employee salaries during restructuring. One manager asked whether Adrian would keep his compensation. Elena looked toward him. Adrian stood. No, he said. My salary will be reduced to the median salary of a company employee until the audit is complete. My unvested stock will be placed in trust for the pension fund. The room filled with murmurs. Elena had not asked him to do that. Afterward, she confronted him privately. You should have discussed that with the board. I know. Then why didn't you? Because it was mine to surrender. Public gestures can look manipulative. It wasn't for the public. Everything a CEO does is public. He met her eyes. Then let them see me lose something. Elena had no answer. That weekend, the children attended a science fair at school. Adrian learned about it from a photograph on a local news website. Maya's project had won first place. He stared at the picture for a long time. Maya stood beside a model of a water filtration system. Her project examined how natural materials could remove contaminants from water. Lighthouse had affected her more than Elena realized. Adrian did not attend the fair. He sent no flowers or gifts. On Monday, however, Elena found a research paper on her desk about funding community science programs. A note was attached. The company should create a grant after the cleanup, not in anyone's name. Elena read the note twice. She approved the proposal with one change. Residents near Lighthouse would choose the grant recipients. A week later, the children asked to see Adrian. The request came from Noah. He might go to jail, Noah said during dinner. We do not know that, Elena replied. But people at school said everyone at the company is a criminal. People at school do not have all the facts. Do we? Elena set down her fork. Not yet. Noah looked at his siblings. We want to ask him questions. Leela frowned. You want to ask him questions? Maya nodded slowly. I do too. Elias raised his hand. I have 7. Leela remained silent. Elena looked at Ruth. Ruth did not speak, but her expression was clear. Protection was not control. The meeting took place in a family therapist's office, away from the company and cameras. Adrian arrived early. He wore no tie and carried nothing. The children sat together on a couch. Elena remained near the door. Noah asked the first question. Did you know there were 4 of us? Yes. Did you know if we were boys or girls? No. Did you ever try to find out? Adrian swallowed. No. Maya asked why. Because I was ashamed. Of us. Of myself. That doesn't answer it. Adrian nodded. I was afraid that seeing you would force me to admit what I had done, so I avoided knowing anything. It was selfish and wrong. Elias leaned forward. Did you think about us on our birthdays? I didn't know the exact day you were born. Elias looked shocked. You didn't know our birthday? No. Our birthday is very important. I know that now. Leela spoke from the end of the couch. You keep saying now. Adrian looked at her. Because now you can see what you lost, she said. What about what we lost? He did not defend himself. You lost a father, he said. You lost someone who should have been there. I cannot return those years. Then what do you want? I want to become someone you may choose to know, but you do not owe me that choice. The room became quiet. Noah asked, Are you bad? Adrian's eyes moved toward Elena, then back to his son. I have done bad things. That's not the same question. No, Adrian said, it is. He thought for a moment. I think I became a person who valued success more than people. That made me dangerous, even when I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Maya looked impressed by the answer despite herself. Elias asked whether Adrian liked dogs. Noah wanted to know if he could play football. Maya asked why the company used pension money. Leela asked nothing else. When the session ended, Adrian stood near the door. The children walked past him. Elias paused. Our birthday is October 17th. Adrian's eyes filled. Thank you. Don't forget. I won't. Leela turned back. Remembering now doesn't fix forgetting before. I know. She studied him. But it's better than forgetting again. Then she followed the others. Elena remained behind. You answered carefully, she said. I answered honestly. Those are not always the same thing. Today they were. She believed him. That frightened her more than when she had believed he was lying. The full lighthouse report arrived the following week. The contamination was extensive, but contained enough that immediate cleanup could prevent long-term spread. Investigators found that Richard and Blake had known the original property required millions in remediation. They concealed the information to inflate the site's value, secure loans, and collect hidden commissions. Adrian had approved the purchase after receiving a false report. He had not participated in the fraud, but internal emails showed that a junior safety officer warned his office about missing environmental records. Adrian's chief of staff forwarded the warning to him. His reply contained 4 words. Handle it through Blake. That email became the center of the case against him. Elena called him into her office. He read the message and sat down. I remember this. What did you think it meant? I thought Blake would get the missing records. Did you follow up? No. Why? We were preparing an expansion announcement. I was traveling, I trusted him. A community drank contaminated water because you were busy. Adrian covered his face. Elena felt no satisfaction. The truth was rarely as clean as innocence or guilt. Richard had designed the fraud, Blake had executed it, Adrian had opened the gate through arrogance and neglect. "What will happen to me?" he asked. "That depends on regulators and the board." "What do you think should happen?" Elena looked at him for a long time. "I think you should lose the position you valued more than your humanity." He nodded slowly. "When?" "After the shareholder hearing." "Why not now?" "Because you will testify first." The hearing filled the largest conference hall in company headquarters. Shareholders, employees, reporters, regulators, and community representatives attended. Cameras broadcast the proceedings. Richard appeared remotely from a lawyer's office. Blake refused to testify. Elena presented the investigation's findings for nearly 3 hours. Then Adrian took the stage. His attorneys had advised him to minimize responsibility. They recommended emphasizing that Richard and Blake concealed information. Adrian ignored the advice. "I did not create the fraudulent reports," he said. "I did not receive hidden payments, and I did not know the lighthouse property was contaminated when I approved the purchase." Richard's attorney relaxed. Then Adrian continued. "But I created a culture where information that threatened my plans was treated as an obstacle. I rewarded speed over caution. I trusted people who told me what I wanted to hear. When warnings appeared, I passed them to others because I believed my time was too valuable for uncomfortable details." The hall was silent. "I was not the architect of this fraud," he said. "But my ambition created shelter for it." Elena watched Richard's expression tighten on the screen. Adrian turned toward the camera. "My father taught me that responsibility belongs to the person with the least power to refuse it. Today, I reject that lesson." Richard leaned toward his microphone. "This is emotional nonsense." Adrian faced the screen. "No, emotional nonsense is what you called my family when I told you Elena was expecting 4 children." A murmur moved through the hall. Elena's heart pounded. Adrian continued. "You convinced me that abandoning them proved I was strong. I chose to believe you because your approval was easier to earn than my own integrity." Richard's face darkened. "You are humiliating yourself." "I humiliated myself 8 years ago. Today I am admitting it." Adrian presented the trust amendment and testified that Richard controlled the funds intended for the children. Richard denied stealing the money. Investigators then revealed that the same amount had entered one of his shell companies 3 days after Adrian's transfer. The evidence was decisive. By the end of the hearing, the board removed Richard permanently. Regulators announced criminal charges against him and Blake for fraud, obstruction, theft, and environmental violations. Adrian was not charged with conspiracy. He faced civil penalties and possible action for breach of fiduciary duty. Then Elena approached the microphone. "Mr. Cole," she said, 90 days ago, I allowed you to remain CEO during the investigation." The room leaned toward her words. "Those 90 days end today." Adrian stood. Elena held the document that would remove him from power. Everyone expected revenge. Richard had predicted it. Reporters had written about it. Commentators described Elena as the abandoned wife who now controlled her former husband's fate. But Elena had no interest in becoming a character inside someone else's simple story. She looked at the employees seated before her, the lighthouse residents near the front, and the 4 children watching from a private room upstairs. Effective immediately, Adrian Cole is removed as Chief Executive Officer. The sentence echoed through the hall. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. "Elena Vale will not assume the position," she continued. Whispers spread. "The company will begin a public search for an independent chief executive with experience in ethical restructuring. Until that appointment, operations will be managed by a committee including employee, community, and shareholder representatives." She placed another document on the table. 51% of my voting shares will be transferred into a permanent stewardship trust. The trust will reserve board seats for employees and communities affected by company operations. No future owner, including me, will possess unchecked power. The hall erupted. Elena waited for silence. Miriam Vale believed power was responsibility. This company forgot that lesson. Today we begin remembering. A reporter shouted, "What happens to Mr. Cole?" Elena looked at Adrian. "He has been offered a position with the Lighthouse Restoration Project." More murmurs followed. "The role carries no executive title, no stock options, and no special authority. He will work under an independent community board. His compensation will match that of the project's senior field managers." Adrian stared at her. He had expected removal. He had not expected purpose. "Why give him any position?" another reporter asked. "Because punishment without repair may satisfy anger, but it does not clean water, restore pensions, or rebuild trust." She turned toward Adrian. "The offer is voluntary." He walked to the microphone. "I accept." His voice shook. Not because he had lost the company, because Elena had placed responsibility in his hands without restoring his power. She had given him no throne from which to perform redemption. Only work. The lighthouse restoration took 3 years. Adrian moved out of his penthouse and into a small apartment near the project site. He attended community meetings where residents interrupted, criticized, and sometimes refused to speak to him. He listened. He visited homes receiving new water systems. He reviewed every environmental report personally. When Helen Ward asked why the cleanup had taken so long to begin, he did not mention Richard or Blake. "Because people in charge, including me, failed you," he said. Helen did not forgive him that day. She did, however, allow him to carry bottled water into her garage. The children's relationship with Adrian developed slowly. At first, they saw him only during supervised sessions. Then came short visits in public places. Noah asked Adrian to attend a football match, but warned him not to cheer too loudly. Adrian arrived 30 minutes early and cheered too loudly anyway. Maya showed him her science projects. He never pretended to understand when he did not. Instead, he asked questions. Elias invited him to a school play. Adrian sat in the back row and cried when Elias spoke one line. Leela remained cautious. For her 9th birthday, Adrian gave each child a handwritten letter. There was no money inside, no promises, no excuses. Leela read hers alone. It said, "You were right, I became sorry when I saw what I had lost. I am learning that real sorrow is not about what I lost. It is about what my choices cost you. I cannot ask you to trust me. I can only behave in a way that makes trust possible someday." Leela did not respond. But she kept the letter. Elena and Adrian did not reunite. Some wounds did not need romance to prove they had healed. They learned to speak about the children without reopening every old argument. They attended school meetings. They made decisions. They disagreed. Once during a parent-teacher conference, a teacher assumed they were married. "No," Elena said. Adrian added, "We are their parents." It was the first title he had ever spoken with pride that did not come from a board. The company recovered under its new leadership. Pension funds were restored. The lighthouse site became a research and environmental education center. Maya's school received the first community science grant, chosen by residents through an anonymous process. Richard was convicted. Before sentencing, he wrote Adrian a letter accusing him of destroying the family legacy. Adrian never answered. He gave the letter to Elena. "You should keep it," she said. "No. Why give it to me?" "Because I spent my life believing legacy was what powerful men handed down. You taught me it is also what we refuse to continue." Elena placed the letter into the legal archive. Not as a family document, as evidence. Years passed. On the Quadruplets' 12th birthday, Adrian arrived at Elena's house carrying a cake. It leaned badly to one side. Noah opened the door and stared at it. "Did you make that?" Yes. Why? I thought it would be meaningful. It looks dangerous. Elias appeared behind him. Is it chocolate? Yes. Then it's fine. Maya inspected the icing. Leela stood near the staircase, older now, her expression gentler but still careful. You remembered the date, she said. I wrote it on every calendar I own. That sounds excessive. It probably is. She stepped aside. You can come in. Adrian entered the house. The walls were covered with the same photographs that once made him feel like a stranger. Now a few included him. Not many. Enough. Ruth sat in the living room wearing a paper birthday crown. She looked at Adrian and pointed toward the kitchen. Put the cake beside the professional one. There's another cake. Elena knows you. Adrian laughed. From the kitchen, Elena heard the sound. Once it would have broken her. Now it was simply a sound, belonging to a complicated life she had chosen carefully. She carried plates into the dining room. Adrian looked at her. Thank you for inviting me. The children invited you. I know. Elena began arranging the plates. He helped without being asked. For a moment, they moved around each other with the old familiarity of their marriage. Then the moment passed without pain. Do you ever wonder, Adrian asked quietly. About what? What would have happened if I had stayed? Elena glanced toward the children. Noah was trying to repair the cake with extra icing. Maya was explaining why that would not work. Elias was eating decorations. Leela was pretending not to laugh. No, Elena said. Adrian seemed surprised. I used to, she continued, but wondering became a way of imagining that another version of my life was more real than the one I had. And now I know the life I built. He nodded. I'm sorry I wasn't part of the beginning. So am I. He looked at her carefully. It was the first time she had admitted sorrow without anger. But, Elena said, you do not get to make their future about your regret. I won't. You will disappoint them sometimes. I know. You will make mistakes. I know. You cannot disappear when being their father becomes uncomfortable. I won't. Elena held his gaze. We'll see. He smiled faintly. It was not forgiveness. It was something more honest. A chance measured in actions. During dinner, Elias asked everyone to say the best thing that had happened that year. Noah chose scoring the winning goal in a school tournament. Maya chose visiting the restored lighthouse wetlands. Leela chose winning a writing competition. Elias chose getting a dog, although the family did not have one. We are getting a dog, he explained. Elena raised an eyebrow. Adrian looked away, suddenly interested in his plate. Did you promise him a dog? Elena asked. I said we could discuss the possibility. Elias grinned. That means yes. It does not, Elena and Adrian said together. The children burst into laughter. When it was Adrian's turn, he looked around the table. The best thing that happened this year was being allowed to keep showing up. Leela's eyes met his. Showing up is not a special event, she said. It's supposed to be normal. Adrian nodded. You're right. She sighed. But you're getting better at it. He smiled. Elena's turn came last. She looked at Ruth, who had opened her home when Elena had none. She looked at the 4 children, who had once seemed like an impossible future. She looked at Adrian, no longer a powerful CEO, no longer a frightened young man trying to outrun responsibility, but someone still learning that love had to be practiced rather than declared. The best thing, Elena said, is that we stopped allowing the past to make all our decisions. After dinner, the children carried the cakes outside. Adrian remained behind to help Elena clear the table. On the counter sat an old photograph Ruth had recently found in storage. Elena and Adrian on the beach. Wherever we go together. Adrian saw it. I thought I had the only copy, he said. I almost threw it away. Why didn't you? Elena dried a plate. Because destroying evidence does not change history. He laughed softly. You really are a lawyer. I was always a lawyer, I just didn't have the degree yet. Outside, the children called them. Elena placed the plate in the cabinet. She and Adrian walked toward the garden, not side by side and not far apart. The quadruplets stood behind 12 glowing candles. Adrian stopped at the doorway. For 1 second, Elena saw the memory pass across his face, the 4 heartbeats on the ultrasound monitor, the rain against the apartment windows, the suitcase beside the door. He had once believed 4 children would destroy his future. Instead, abandoning them had destroyed the person he might have been. Returning did not restore that person. It forced him to build another. Noah waved impatiently. Come on, the candles are melting. Adrian joined them. Elena remained near Ruth's. You did well, Ruth whispered. We did. No, Ruth said. You did. You refused to let revenge choose the ending. Elena watched Adrian listen as Elias explained the complicated rules for making a birthday wish. I thought justice would feel like watching him lose everything, Elena said. And did it? No. What did it feel like? Elena considered the question. Like making sure no one else had to lose what we did. The children blew out the candles. Smoke curled into the evening air. Everyone applauded. Adrian looked across the table at Elena. There was gratitude in his eyes, but she did not need it. She no longer needed him to understand her pain for it to be valid. She no longer needed his regret to prove her worth. She had built a family, earned her power, protected thousands of workers, restored a damaged community, and transformed the company that once represented everything Adrian chose over her. The greatest consequence was not that Adrian trembled when she returned. It was that Elena no longer did. Dear viewers, if you believe people should be judged not only by the mistakes they make, but also by whether they accept responsibility and repair the harm they caused, kindly subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more meaningful stories like this one. Elena's journey reminds us that supporting an abandoned mother does not mean celebrating revenge. It means standing for dignity, justice, protection, and the right to rebuild a life without surrendering to bitterness. Adrian's journey reminds us that apologies mean little without changed behavior, and forgiveness should never be demanded from those who were hurt. Share your thoughts in the comments. Was Elena right to give Adrian a chance to help repair the damage, or should she have removed him from their lives forever? Your voice matters, and your support helps this community continue telling stories where courage rises, truth is revealed, and consequences finally reach the people who tried to escape them.